"Officer down, shots fired." The radio crackles with urgency through the bitter January air. Inside the modest suburban home, flashlight beams cut through darkness, revealing a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. "Found another deceased. Make that 8 total." The voices are professional but strained, masking the horror of what lies before them. In the quiet city of Enoch, Utah, where neighbors know each other by name and leave their doors unlocked. January 4th, 2023, marked the day when trust died. As police conducted a routine wellness check at the Haight family residence, they discovered a tragedy that would send shockwaves through the tight-knit community of just a few thousand souls. 8 bodies, each bearing gunshot wounds, told a story of unimaginable violence that had erupted within these walls. The Haight's weren't just any family in Enoch, they were its beating heart. Every Sunday, their presence at church was as reliable as the sunrise. Michael and Tasha Haight embodied the American dream, a successful insurance salesman and his devoted wife, raising their children with strong values and unwavering faith. Their home was often filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the warmth of family gatherings. Nobody could have predicted the darkness that lurked beneath this picture-perfect facade. Their love story had begun like so many others, with hope and promise. When Michael and Tasha met at Southern Utah University, it seemed written in the stars. He was the quintessential catch, a returned missionary who had spent 2 years serving in Brazil, armed with a business degree and rapidly climbing the corporate ladder at Allstate Insurance. Tasha saw in him everything she'd been raised to value: faith, ambition, and dedication to family. Their wedding at St. George Temple on May 16, 2003, was modest but meaningful. At 23 and 21 respectively, Michael and Tasha stood before their loved ones, exchanging vows that would bind them together in what they believed would be an eternal union. The photographs from that day show radiant smiles, tender glances, and not a hint of the tragedy that would unfold 2 decades later. But beneath the veneer of the perfect Mormon family, pressure was building. Like many cases of family annihilation, the warning signs were there. Subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. The profile was textbook: an educated, middle-aged professional man struggling with control issues and deep-seated psychological turmoil. The Haight family massacre would soon join a disturbing trend of familicide cases sweeping across America, leaving communities to grapple with an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the greatest threats aren't strangers lurking in shadows, but the familiar faces we see every day. The story of the Haight's serves as a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it builds slowly, like a pressure cooker, within the walls of a seemingly perfect home, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be contained. Their story would force the community of Enoch to confront difficult questions about the nature of appearances, the limits of trust, and the devastating consequences of overlooking the warning signs of impending tragedy. As the young couple settled into their new life in Enoch, all seemed destined for happiness. Within those early years, their family grew quickly, almost too quickly for some observers. By 2022, Michael and Tasha had welcomed 7 beautiful children into their home. 3 boys and 4 girls, ranging from ages 4 to 17. The oldest, Macy, was already turning heads with her academic excellence and leadership potential, following closely in her father's footsteps of achievement and ambition. Their sprawling 5-bedroom house on Albert Drive became a hub of community activity. The sound of children playing, the aroma of Tasha's home cooking, and the constant stream of visitors created an atmosphere of warmth and vitality. From the outside, the Haight's appeared to be living the American dream: a successful businessman father, a devoted mother, and children who excelled in both academics and church activities. Michael's career at Allstate continued to flourish. His colleagues described him as methodical, detail-oriented, and laser-focused on success. He had a gift for numbers and an almost uncanny ability to close deals. The company recognized his talents, promoting him multiple times and holding him up as an example for newer agents to emulate. His income provided well for his growing family, allowing Tausha to focus on raising their children and maintaining their picture-perfect home. But success, as many discover, can be a double-edged sword. The pressure to maintain their image of perfection began to weigh heavily on the family, particularly on Michael. Though few noticed at first, subtle changes in his behavior started to emerge. The man who once beamed with pride at his children's achievements began showing signs of irritability and controlling behavior. His attendance at church became more sporadic, raising eyebrows in a community where such dedication rarely wavered. Tausha's mother, Gail Earle, who lived nearby, started spending more time at the house. A retired educator herself, she had always been close to her daughter and grandchildren. Her increased presence seemed to coincide with growing tensions within the household, tensions that would later be recognized as critical warning signs that something was terribly wrong. The cracks in their perfect facade were beginning to show, though few wanted to acknowledge them. In a tight-knit Mormon community where family unity is paramount, the idea that something sinister could be brewing within one of their most exemplary families was almost impossible to contemplate. Yet, as investigators would later discover, the Haight household had become a pressure cooker of domestic tension, financial stress, and psychological manipulation. By late 2022, those closest to the family began noticing more obvious signs of trouble. Michael's behavior became increasingly erratic. His once impeccable work performance began to slip, and there were whispers about financial difficulties. Tausha confided in a few close friends about her growing concerns, though she carefully maintained the family's public image of harmony and success. What no one could have predicted was how quickly and catastrophically these underlying issues would explode into violence, transforming a story of apparent success into one of America's most tragic cases of family annihilation. The warning signs, so clear in hindsight, would soon become part of a larger conversation about domestic violence and the masks that abusers wear in public. In the final months, the Haight family's story would take a dark turn that would leave their community questioning everything they thought they knew about their neighbors, their friends, and the nature of evil itself. The facade of perfection was about to crumble in the most devastating way possible, leaving behind questions that would haunt Enoch for years to come. The unraveling began in late December 2022, when Tausha filed for divorce. It was a decision that sent shockwaves through their social circle, though few understood the depth of turmoil that had led to this breaking point. In the Mormon community, where eternal marriage is a cornerstone of faith, divorce represents not just the end of an earthly union, but the severance of a spiritual bond meant to last through the afterlife. The timing of the divorce filing proved crucial. 2 weeks before the tragedy, Michael had moved out of the family home, a development that would later be recognized as a critical escalation point. During this period, Tausha's mother, Gail Earle, moved in to provide support and protection for her daughter and grandchildren. Her presence seemed to offer a sense of security, though, tragically, it would prove insufficient against what was to come. As investigators would later piece together, Michael's behavior in these final weeks showed classic signs of a man losing control. His carefully constructed image of success and authority was crumbling. The divorce proceedings revealed troubling financial discrepancies, suggesting that the family's prosperity might have been more precarious than anyone realized. His colleagues at Allstate noticed his increasing distraction and declining performance, though none could have predicted the violent turn his desperation would take. On January 3, 2023, Michael returned to the family home. Security camera footage from a neighbor's house would later show him arriving in the evening hours. What transpired inside those walls during the next several hours would become the subject of intense investigation and soul-searching for the entire community. The following morning, when the bodies were discovered, the scene told a story of methodical violence that chilled even veteran law enforcement officers. Michael had systematically murdered his entire family: Tausha, 40, their 5 children, Macy, 17, Briley, 12, Sienna, 7, Ammon, 7, and Gavin, 4, and his mother-in-law, Gail Earl, 78. The investigation revealed that the murders had been carefully planned, with Michael saving himself for last in a final act of control. The aftermath sent ripples of horror through Enoch. The community gathered in shocked clusters, trying to make sense of how one of their most respected families could end in such violence. The local Mormon church, which had been such a central part of the Haight's lives, became a gathering place for mourning and questioning. How had their teachings about eternal families and patriarchal authority been so terribly twisted in Michael's mind? The case sparked intense debate about domestic violence within religious communities, where victims often face unique pressures to maintain family unity at all costs. Tausha's friends came forward with stories of controlling behavior they had witnessed but hadn't fully recognized as abuse. The masks that Michael had worn, successful businessman, devoted father, faithful church member, had been so convincing that even those closest to the family had missed the warning signs of impending violence. In the following months, as more details emerged about the family's private struggles, the community was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of domestic abuse and the ways in which their own cultural values might have inadvertently created barriers for victims seeking help. The Haight family tragedy became a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about mental health, financial transparency in marriages, and the importance of recognizing early warning signs of domestic violence. The house on Albert Drive stands empty now, a silent monument to the lives lost within its walls. For the people of Enoch, it serves as a permanent reminder that evil can wear the most benign faces, and that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the shadows, but in the bright spaces we think we know best. In the wake of the tragedy, investigators began piecing together the final months of Michael Haight's life, revealing a disturbing pattern of escalating control and manipulation. The divorce filing had triggered what psychologists would later identify as a catastrophic loss of control, a common precursor in cases of family annihilation. Court documents revealed that Tausha had cited emotional and mental abuse in her divorce petition. Friends and family members, now freed from their reluctance to speak ill of the dead, began sharing stories that painted a picture of a man whose public persona had masked years of controlling behavior. Michael had monitored Tausha's phone calls, restricted her access to family finances, and isolated her from support systems outside the church community. Perhaps most chilling were the revelations about Michael's professional life. His career at Allstate, long viewed as a symbol of his success, had been showing signs of strain. Colleagues reported increased agitation in client meetings, missed deadlines, and uncharacteristic errors in policy documentation. An internal review would later uncover financial irregularities that suggested Michael had been struggling to maintain his family's lifestyle while hiding mounting debts. The investigation also shed light on the role of religious and cultural factors in the tragedy. In the Mormon community, where masculine authority is deeply intertwined with spiritual leadership, Michael's loss of control over his family represented not just a personal failure, but a profound spiritual crisis. His final actions, methodically eliminating his entire family before taking his own life, aligned with the disturbing pattern seen in other cases of family annihilation, where perpetrators view their families as extensions of themselves rather than independent individuals. Gail Earle's presence in the home during those final weeks took on new significance as details emerged. As a retired educator and respected community member, she had recognized the danger her daughter and grandchildren faced. Yet, even her protective presence wasn't enough to prevent the tragedy. Her death alongside her family highlighted the limitations of individual intervention in cases of domestic violence, where systemic support and professional intervention are often crucial. The children's schools provided another window into the family's final months. Teachers reported subtle changes in the older children's behavior, increased anxiety, declining grades, and withdrawal from social activities. Macy, the eldest at 17, had confided in a school counselor about tensions at home, though, like many teenagers from troubled families, she had downplayed their severity. The case sparked significant changes in how the Enoch community approached domestic violence. The local Mormon church leadership initiated new training programs for clergy members, focusing on recognizing signs of abuse and understanding when to involve law enforcement or mental health professionals. The police department revised its protocols for responding to domestic disturbance calls, implementing more thorough follow-up procedures and better coordination with domestic violence resources. A memorial garden now stands in the city park, dedicated to the Haight family victims. 7 trees, one for Tausha, one for Gail, and one for each child, provide shade for benches where community members can reflect on the lessons learned from this tragedy. The garden serves as both a tribute to the lives lost and a reminder of the community's commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. The Haight family massacre became a catalyst for broader discussions about domestic violence in religious communities across America. Researchers and advocates point to the case as an example of how traditional values and religious beliefs can sometimes create barriers to recognizing and addressing abuse. The tragedy has become a case study in law enforcement training programs, helping officers better understand the complex dynamics of family annihilation and the importance of early intervention. In Enoch, the wounds are still fresh. Every Sunday, the empty pews where the Haight family once sat serve as a quiet reminder of what was lost. Yet from this tragedy has emerged a stronger, more vigilant community, one that understands that true faith and family values must include protecting the vulnerable and recognizing that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust the most. The aftermath of the Haight family tragedy continues to reverberate through America's consciousness, particularly as it intersects with broader conversations about domestic violence and mental health in religious communities. The case has become a sobering reference point for law enforcement, mental health professionals, and religious leaders grappling with similar patterns of family violence. Statistics gathered in the wake of the tragedy revealed a disturbing trend. Family annihilation cases had seen a marked increase during and after the pandemic years. The Haight case exhibited many of the classic warning signs that experts had identified: financial stress, controlling behavior masked by religious authority, and the trigger of impending divorce. What made this case particularly significant was how it challenged assumptions about the protective nature of close-knit religious communities. In the years following the tragedy, Enoch underwent a profound transformation. The community's response moved beyond initial shock and grief to implement concrete changes. The local police department established a dedicated domestic violence unit, with officers receiving specialized training in identifying high-risk situations. The Mormon church leadership, traditionally private about family matters, began hosting regular workshops addressing domestic violence, mental health, and financial transparency in marriages. The case also prompted a scholarly examination of the intersection between religious beliefs and domestic abuse. Researchers noted how certain religious teachings about patriarchal authority and family preservation could inadvertently create environments where abuse might flourish undetected. The Haight case became a cornerstone example in academic studies, leading to new frameworks for understanding how spiritual beliefs can either protect against or enable domestic violence. Perhaps, most significantly, the tragedy sparked a national conversation about the role of financial transparency in marriages. Investigation into Michael's business dealings revealed a pattern of hidden financial stress that had contributed to his psychological deterioration. This led to changes in how financial institutions and insurance companies monitor for signs of fraud or misconduct that might indicate deeper personal crises. The children's schools implemented new protocols for identifying and responding to signs of family distress. Macy Haight's final school essays, discovered after her death, contained subtle cries for help that had gone unrecognized. These writings now serve as teaching tools for educators learning to identify students living in potentially dangerous home situations. Tauscha's decision to file for divorce, made just weeks before the tragedy, has been extensively analyzed by domestic violence experts. Her actions aligned with research showing that the period immediately following separation represents the highest risk for lethal violence. This timing has led to enhanced safety protocols for women leaving abusive relationships, particularly within religious communities where divorce carries additional social stigma. The role of Gail Earle, Tauscha's mother, has become central to discussions about family intervention in domestic violence situations. While her presence demonstrated the importance of family support systems, her inability to prevent the tragedy highlighted the limitations of informal protection measures. This has led to more structured approaches to safety planning for families in crisis. Today, the Haight family tragedy serves as more than a cautionary tale. It has become a catalyst for systemic change. Police departments nationwide study the case for insights into preventing family violence. Religious organizations use it to educate leaders about the complex dynamics of abuse within faith communities. Mental health professionals reference it when discussing the importance of comprehensive intervention strategies. In Enoch, the physical reminders of the tragedy have been transformed into symbols of hope and change. The former Haight family home, once a crime scene, has been converted into a resource center for domestic violence prevention. The memorial garden continues to grow, its trees now tall enough to offer shade to visitors who come to reflect on the lessons learned from this devastating loss. The legacy of the Haight family tragedy continues to evolve, challenging communities across America to examine their own blind spots and biases when it comes to family violence. It stands as a powerful reminder that preventing such tragedies requires more than individual vigilance. It demands systemic change, cultural transformation, and the courage to acknowledge that sometimes the most dangerous monsters wear the masks of respectability. The ripple effects of the Haight family tragedy extended far beyond Enoch's city limits, prompting a nationwide examination of similar cases and their underlying patterns. Analysis revealed that family annihilators often share specific characteristics that had been present in Michael Haight: a deep investment in maintaining control, an inability to separate their own identity from their families, and a catastrophic response to perceived loss of authority. In the years following the tragedy, mental health professionals began documenting what they termed the Haight pattern, a specific progression of controlling behaviors masked by religious devotion and professional success. This pattern included financial manipulation, spiritual coercion, and the strategic use of community standing to maintain an image of family perfection while executing increasingly severe forms of domestic control. The investigation into Michael's final weeks revealed a methodical dismantling of the family's financial foundation. He had systematically transferred assets, altered insurance policies, and made strategic withdrawals that suggested premeditation. These actions, when studied alongside similar cases, helped establish new protocols for financial institutions to identify potential warning signs of impending family violence. The Mormon Church, facing increased scrutiny over its handling of domestic abuse cases, initiated comprehensive reforms in its approach to family counseling. Local bishops received enhanced training in recognizing signs of emotional and financial abuse. The church also revised its policies regarding confidentiality in cases of suspected domestic violence, establishing clearer guidelines for when religious leaders should involve law enforcement or mental health professionals. The educational system's role in the tragedy became a focal point for reform. A review of school records showed that each of the Haight children had exhibited signs of domestic stress that, while noted individually, had never been connected to form a complete picture of the family's situation. This led to the development of new coordination protocols between teachers, counselors, and administrators in identifying patterns of family distress. Tausha's final text messages recovered from her phone revealed a woman who recognized the escalating danger but struggled to navigate the complex intersection of religious obligations, family responsibilities, and personal safety. These messages now serve as teaching tools in domestic violence prevention programs, helping others recognize the subtle indicators of impending violence. The case also prompted a re-evaluation of how law enforcement handles wellness checks in situations involving domestic tension. The officers who discovered the scene had followed standard protocols, but the tragedy led to enhanced procedures for approaching homes where domestic violence might be present, particularly in cases involving recent divorce filings or protection orders. Gail Earle's role in the tragedy sparked new research into the effectiveness of family intervention in domestic violence situations. While her presence had provided temporary security, her tragic death alongside her daughter and grandchildren highlighted the limitations of informal protection measures. This led to the development of more structured approaches to family safety planning, incorporating professional security measures and community support networks. The impact on Enoch's first responders, who discovered and processed the crime scene, led to enhanced mental health support systems for law enforcement personnel. The department established mandatory counseling protocols for officers involved in domestic violence cases, recognizing the cumulative trauma of responding to family violence. Today, the Haight family tragedy serves as a cornerstone case study in law enforcement training programs nationwide. It demonstrates how seemingly successful families can harbor deadly secrets, and how traditional assumptions about family stability can blind communities to escalating danger. The case continues to influence policy decisions regarding domestic violence intervention, mental health support, and community response to family crisis situations. The Memorial Garden, now an established fixture in Enoch's landscape, has become a site of national significance in the domestic violence prevention movement. Annual gatherings bring together survivors, advocates, and experts to discuss ongoing efforts to prevent similar tragedies. The 7 trees, growing stronger each year, stand as living reminders of the price of silence and the importance of community vigilance. The Haight family tragedy stands as a watershed moment in America's understanding of family violence, particularly within religious communities. The case revealed how traditional values, religious authority, and professional success can create a perfect mask for domestic abuse, allowing it to escalate unchecked until reaching a catastrophic conclusion. This case transformed our understanding of family annihilation in several significant ways. It demonstrated that prosperity, religious devotion, and community standing are not reliable indicators of family stability. The tragedy forced communities nationwide to confront uncomfortable truths about how cultural and religious values can sometimes create barriers to recognizing and addressing domestic violence. The legacy of this case continues to evolve through concrete institutional changes. Law enforcement agencies have revised their protocols for domestic violence response. Religious organizations have implemented new training programs for clergy. Schools have developed enhanced systems for identifying and reporting signs of family distress. Financial institutions have established new monitoring protocols for detecting patterns that might indicate impending family violence. Perhaps most importantly, The Haight family tragedy has become a catalyst for broader cultural change. Communities across America have begun to challenge the notion that family privacy should supersede safety concerns. There is growing recognition that domestic violence intervention requires a coordinated response from multiple institutions: law enforcement, religious organizations, schools, and mental health services. The events in Enoch, Utah remind us that the most dangerous predators often hide in plain sight, wearing the masks of respectability and success. The tragedy continues to teach us that preventing family violence requires more than individual vigilance. It demands systemic change, cultural transformation, and the courage to look beyond appearances to recognize signs of danger. As we move forward, the Haight family tragedy serves not only as a sobering reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence, but also as a blueprint for change. Their story challenges us to remain vigilant, to question our assumptions, and to create communities where safety and support take precedence over the preservation of appearances. In this way, their tragic end continues to save lives by compelling us to recognize and respond to the warning signs that might prevent similar tragedies in the future.